for a brief overview of what we're covering, it'll be about like an hour of kind of presenting on like squat technique, and then we'll have questions. Andonius, the gym owner here, he's going to be covering like hip mechanics and mobility afterwards, and then after that, we're going to move on to the like hands-on kind of portion, so you can squat and get some feedback. My name is Michael Elrod-Erickson. I was the assistant coach for Team USA at the IPL World Championships in 2023 and 2024. Also own my own coaching business, Premier Power and Performance. If anyone's curious, my best squat, 501 in sleeves and 537 in wraps. But I've coached lifters much stronger than me, even women. I helped an untested woman get her first 500-pound squat, which is like 3 times body weight. And like I also coached the team at UH. We've had a collegiate guy, drug-free, go from like 540 to 740 in the last like year and a half. And out of the 3 new guys that we had that stuck around for like the fall and spring semester, they averaged 100 pounds on their squat in the like 9 months that we had for the school semester. So the order that we're going to cover stuff is basically kind of like top down, like starting with the shoulders, because I think it's going to help kind of structure things if it has like a linear flow rather than just jumping all around. And honestly, like that's kind of the order that you have to set up for the squat. Like you have to get under the bar with your shoulders before you can like actually do the squat. So we're going to work our way down. And then some of you may have seen the like little advertisement Instagram clip. But to kind of go over it for anyone that didn't, the like a big concept for today is we're trying to like create stiffness and get like all the different joints stable and not moving, because we need that in order to transfer force well into the bar. Like imagine someone swung a baseball bat at you versus a pool noodle. Only the baseball bat is going to hurt because it's like stiff and actually transfers the force, whereas the pool noodle just kind of like flops around. So we're trying to be like stiff and be the baseball bat, not the pool noodle where like we can push with our legs really hard, but then it just kind of gets lost like through here before it actually gets to the bar. Because the more efficient you can transfer the force, the more weight you should be able to squat. And then you can get bigger cheeks. So honestly, like most of the joints that we're covering, it's like how to not move. The joints that actually do move in order to do the squat, the knees and the hips, we have to like bend in order to get down to depth and then stand back up. Those ones are pretty self-explanatory. They mostly just kind of take care of themselves if you're managing like everything else well. So ironically, we're spending a lot of time on things that we're trying to not move and like don't have to spend very much on the things that are actually moving. So the very first thing I want to cover was like rack height, because it seems like it shouldn't be that complicated, but still pretty much every time I get like a new client or sent a video by some person on Instagram, like they mess it up. So I'd say too low is always better than too high, because if it's too low, you just squat an extra inch to get it out of the rack. It's not that big a deal. If it's too high, then you see people like getting up on their tippy toes, which shouldn't probably be doing that with super heavy weight. Or they like clip the J cups as they're trying to walk out, and that gets them slightly out of position or off balance. And frankly, it's just not very safe because you can't just like walk back into the rack and like set it down suddenly, or like hoping that after you're done with a super hard set of squats, you can like get it in. So always go too low rather than too high. And then my other big pet peeve with like squat stuff is I want people to always walk back into the rack. A lot of people will like finish their set, they'll stand up, and then they just kind of lean forwards and they like hope that they land in the rack. And that might work today, that might work tomorrow, but like at some point, what if you do miss the rack? You're just like lean forward against the rack with a bunch of weight on your back, or you're just gonna like get pancaked and like fall over or like stumble underneath it or what? Whereas if you walk into the rack and you happen to miss the J cup on one side or both, your feet are underneath you, you can just stand up and like try and put it back. So like what I hate is whenever people are just kind of here, and then rather than walk in, they just, like something like that, or they don't even move their feet, they just fall forwards. We always want to like actually take the step and then set it down. So the next thing is the shoulders. The big goal with our like upper back and shoulders is we're trying to create like a shelf for the bar so that we can support the bar like on your back. We're not holding it in the arms. It should be like sitting on you. So we need to like create that shelf. And then the other thing is we're trying to get stiff so that we can transfer that force into the bar. When it comes to like the intent with upper back, it's pretty much the same for low bar or high bar. It's just we kind of adjust the degrees of these different elements, like they're a bit of a slider. And then the bar placement obviously changes a little bit, but probably less than most people make it out to be. Like high bar and low bar are like these two labels. The reality is like it's not that wildly different, and you can kind of put it like in between. And part of it is not like the vertical distance, it's also like front to back. The low bar sits like a little further back and high bar is a little further forwards too. So like in reality, it's maybe like that far different. But if you think about like the equation for like a rotational force, it's basically like how far away from the point of rotation is it times like how much force are you applying. So when we have a ton of force, because it's a really heavy bar on our back, even like a pretty small difference makes a big difference in terms of like how much force we have to manage and create at the hips. So I'd say the biggest difference between low bar and high bar is not like, well, I'm a little more upright, so I have a little more quads. It's just I'm a little more mechanically advantageous because the bar is closer to the point where I'm trying to like move it from. So I think that bit gets overlooked in favor of like muscular differences or positional differences in terms of like how people talk about it and think about it. But the three things that we're going to have to do, regardless of high bar or low bar, is we're trying to like pinch the shoulders together, like scapular retraction. So imagine you're like at the in position of a row and like really trying to like pull the bar in towards your chest. We're trying to like pinch together. We're also trying to like pull the shoulders down. So like you're doing a lat pull down and like really pulling down. And then the last thing is like kind of screwing in. So it's not just like forwards. It's also kind of like in towards your spine. So it's a little bit of a mix of both. It should be like kind of there. And it can be pretty subtle. It doesn't have to be like much. And how much you're doing will probably vary based on your like size and whether it's high bar or low bar and that kind of stuff. But there should be like at least a teeny bit of that in addition to the other two to like really create tightness in like all three ways. So in terms of like how much of all of those three things we're after, it's basically like as much as we can without sacrificing one of the others. So if you like pinch together as much as possible, normally the shoulders like kind of shrug up a little bit because a lot of the trap fibers that pull the shoulders together also go up a little bit. So we're not trying to pinch together so much that we have elevation. We're also not trying to like pull down so much that we lose that like pinch together. And the biggest one is like we're not trying to like tuck under so much that we lose that pinch together. Because if you're here and you screw in a lot, you'll notice like the back gets wider because those shoulder blades are spreading back out again. So we're not trying to like do as much screwing as we can and totally lose the other two components. We're trying to get like a nice balance of all three to get tight. In terms of the like actual placement where the bar goes, for high bar, I would normally recommend like on the top of the shoulder blade. Some people will go like all the way up on the traps. I think the problem with that is like the surface area that you have, just your traps is like this wide, right? Your actual shoulder blades are that wide. Imagine a table where the legs are like this close together. It's going to be pretty wobbly. One where it's like twice as wide is pretty much twice as stable. So a lot of people that put the bar like way up on their traps are going to see a lot of like tipping side to side with the bar if there's any sort of movement. Whereas like on the shoulder blades, we've got that wide base and much more stability that way. So like that's what I would call high bar for using like one generic label is like top of the shoulder blades once they're pinched together. And then low bar would be like just above the rear delt once it's pinched back. So like right there versus like right here for high bar. So again, it's a pretty subtle difference, but you should be able to feel it at like heavy weights, a difference. So to like actually show those underneath the bar, like I actively pinch together and down. I kind of like get my body out in front and like higher than I actually need it to like set myself. So I'm like really using that to like pinch together and down. And then I scoop my body back underneath, keeping that tension to like stick the bar where I want it. So high bar would sit like right there, or it's kind of like on top of the shoulder blades like we just talked about. I wouldn't go like all the way up here on my neck or on my traps, but like right there. Whereas for low bar, I would probably go just a little bit lower. So it's kind of like right there. So the difference is really just like that little bit right there. But as a result, like if you look at the squat, you will see ever so slightly more upright, ever so slightly more forward knee travel with the high bar, whereas like with the low bar, you're going to be a little bit more leaned over, a little less forward knee travel, maybe the butt a little further back in space. One thing you might see is like people really dynamically like tucking under as they squat. So like Russell Orkey, probably the most famous example. There are great squatters that do it, but I wouldn't necessarily like recommend it or coach anyone into it. I think you can get away with it because the more you lean over, the more like horizontal your body is, the more you're like underneath the bar and it's not gonna like fall off of you. So you don't have to be like as pinched together, and you can be more tucked under as you get like more leaned over. But just because you can doesn't mean that like you should. I think they're still sacrificing a little of that like pinch together element of like keeping the upper back tight that they could otherwise have. And I think the reason that we see like that dynamic, like really like tucking under as they squat and then kind of coming back like that in like really good squatters, it's because they're the ones that can like get away with it. When you have a longer torso and like good leverages, they're not ending up as bent over or like as demanding in terms of like keeping that upper back position, so they can afford to like lose a little bit of like tightness and still hold a decent squat. Whereas people with like kind of shitty leverages, you don't tend to see them like really tucking under as they go, because if they did, they'd probably just lose that tension and like get really rounded over and kick forward by the bar. So I wouldn't encourage anyone to do it. If they're already doing it and they have a good squat, then like I wouldn't necessarily change it. But I also think it's just simpler if you just like hold a position rather than like actively try and change it as you squat. So the next thing, moving on from the shoulders, is going to be like grip. So in terms of grip width, I would say the big thing is like wide enough that you can achieve the position that we just talked about. Wide enough that you can actively like pinch together and down. And there's kind of like a balancing component of like two things. If you go super, super narrow, you like really jam yourself in there, you get like a lot of passive tension. So you're just like shoved into a tight position. If you go really wide, you can like actively pull yourself into the position like we just talked about. So we kind of want a balance of the two. We want some passive tension by like wedging yourself in, but we still want to like be able to actively like create that, and not just rely solely on one or the other. Like I'd say there's two groups that show the extremes really well. A lot of young females will just go like hands where they're like literally touching their shoulders, just jam themselves in there, and they're not creating like any active tension at all. And it's because like they have fairly small and weak upper backs. And rather than like train that and improve that and add the active component, they're just relying like solely on the other extreme. And then like older, bigger guys are kind of like the worst of the other way. They'll go like all the way out on collars like this. There's like zero passive tension because they're like, well, I don't want to work on mobility, to like have to go a little narrower. But they're probably missing out on a little bit of like tension that they could have from like being in a more narrow position. So we want like what kind of hits the Goldilocks sweet spot of like both. The next thing is like the grip styles. Traditionally, you would just grab the bar, fingers over the top, thumbs around. There's two other options that you can use. I would use them like as needed, like as a progression. I wouldn't necessarily like start with a different grip, because this is probably like the most secure, stable one that like provides a lot of tension. But if you don't have the greatest mobility at the shoulder, or it's really beating up your arms or something like that, then you can look to like change it. So the next thing would just be untuck your thumbs, like put the thumbs on the top side of the bar. That essentially lets the bar like rotate in the hand. So we don't have to get as much rotation at the shoulder in order to get into position. Because now rather than having to be here and like nothing else can really move, the whole hand can kind of do this. As a result, like the elbow position and rotation of the shoulder changes. That one should be legal in every federation, as far as I know. The next step would be like a talon grip. That one is not legal in all federations. I think USAPL requires all 4 fingers on the bar, and they don't count the thumb as like a digit that can be wherever. IPF is probably the same. but like PLU, USPA, SPF, all those other ones should allow the Talon grip if you need it. That's just tucking the pinky finger underneath. Again, same sort of deal. We're basically like rotating the hand, right? Like if you look, that's the straight. If you went pinky underneath, the elbows are inherently more tucked. There's some rotation coming from like here rather than having to be there. So the only other like weird thing about it is your hands are probably going to be a little like laterally tilted like that. Because if it's totally straight, the bar is like sitting right here on your pinky. If you tilt a little bit, it sits kind of across and it's not that uncomfortable. Some people will go like thumb over the top, but generally it's going to be like thumb around and feel a little more secure that way. And you still get the like benefit of the rotation even with the thumb around. So like I had to switch to Talon grip fairly recently because I was getting a ton of arm pain even though it's already thumbless, and it's helped me a lot. But again, I would say it should be like a matter of necessity, not just like, oh, this looks cool. So if you're having arm pain or if you're just like in really weird positions, like honestly, I kind of suffer from that too, but like one shoulder sits generally more like this, like kind of tilted forwards. Someone really struggles to like get their shoulders kind of in good position, then like the grips might also open up a little room to like move better. So just to show it really quick, the Talon grip, you would just tuck the pinky under as you set. And then generally the wrist is also going to be like relatively bent back. So it'll be kind of like there. And otherwise, like everything else is the same. It just sits kind of like that. I can't really like turn with the whole bar, but like that's kind of the side view. So there's not a ton of pressure like here on the pinky, unless you were trying to keep it like too straight rather than slightly tilted, or you didn't have much like bend back of the wrist. If it was like super straight, then it might be like sitting on top. And if the bent back wrist position kind of bugs you, you can just put on wrist wraps. They help like take some of the load and support the position. That alone should probably like kind of take care of it. I'm not super worried about people having like totally straight wrists on the squat because there shouldn't really be a ton of weight like through the upper body. Most of it should be sitting on your back. So I don't think it's essential that like the wrists are in one position. If anything, being bent back means takes off a little demand at the shoulders in terms of like getting to where we need to be. Since we kind of mentioned arm pain, and I know like you've had some in the past, we'll cover it at least a little bit, especially because if you train for a long period of time, you're probably going to end up with arm pain at some point. The first and biggest thing is like make sure the weight is sitting on your back, not through your arms. Some people will be like really supporting the bar or like pressing up into it or something like that. We don't want that. The bar should like be sitting on you down and your hands are just kind of like supporting on it, not pressing into the bar or supporting the bar. The next thing would be like, are your shoulders actually stable? If you're not creating that position that we've talked about, then the shoulders just kind of like woo, and the arms like kind of pick up the slack. Like if the shoulder's not stable, then the bicep, like one of the heads and one of the heads of the tricep, both cross onto the shoulder, so like they can contract and try and help create some of that stability and reduce movement. And that might be why you're beating up your arm so bad, because it's trying to do more to create that stability, or it's just supporting a lot of the weight like we were just talking about. So first thing is like make sure neither of those big technique issues are happening. If that alone like doesn't clean it up or you don't have any issues in that regard, the next thing would be like grip. Can you go thumbless? Can you go Talon grip? Does that help? And like try it for a few weeks and like get good at it, not just like, oh, I did it one day and I still had arm pain. Especially because the arm pain might take a month, 2 months to like totally like kind of gradually clear up. And a lot of people will feel it when they bench, but it's still from when they squat. So that bit can kind of be confusing. Yeah. I mean, bench can factor in if you like don't have good shoulder stability. Like again, the arms get a little more beat up, like trying to compensate. But generally, it's going to be from the squat. So like fix the technique, change the grip, and then the next thing I would try would be like warm ups. So like make sure you're actually improving that mobility before you can try and use it. My two favorite things, if you guys are reminding me, I can like actually show you. But the first one would be like a McLeod fly. It's named after Dawson Wyndham. That's his middle name, McLeod. but it's basically like the opposite of a face pull. So like, normally you're holding a cable and you pull here, right? Instead, you're laying on a flat or an incline bench, holding a pair of dumbbells. You like lower them down to here, like really opening up and like rotating, and then you press back up. So start super light because obviously that's a bit of a sketchy position. But you can gradually progress over time. Like I've done 25s for a set of 15 or something. I wouldn't push it like hard, but like keeping it submaximal, you can still gradually progress. But the real benefit is like you're working to improve that range of motion, like actively, just like if you were like stretching. But we're also kind of gradually building up strength and tolerance of the tissues that we're loading into. Like when you're jamming yourself into that squat position down here, we're loading into stuff in that direction. If we can actually train that, then we can presumably gradually build some strength and like build up those tissues that are getting loaded. So that's great because it does both of those. The other one that I love is a behind the neck, like scrape the rack with a PVC kind of thing. So like if you have a rack that's like flat, like one of the power racks in there or whatever, you can take a PVC, you like basically set up like you're squatting. So the bar's across your back in like a low bar position with your normal grip. You like go into the rack so you're up against it. And then once you're there, you like press up and the rack will basically like force the bar back behind you as you kind of go. You're trying to keep like good position, not just like super extend like this. You want to like stay kind of here. So you press up and then you come down, and in that bottom position, make sure that you're really like pinch the shoulders together and down and like have that actual squat position. And you can gradually like lean into it more and like get more forwards out in front of the rack, or go like a little lower down your back or narrower grip. And yeah, like a couple sets of the McLeod flies, and that tends to like really help in terms of getting good position and like gradually build up the mobility so you don't get as beat up. If those things aren't working or you need something else that kind of helps with the arm pain, I'd look to like programming. First thing is like probably move your bench away from your squat. So if you squat and then the next day you go and do your heavy bench, you're like, oh my God, my arms are killing me. How about you move the bench as far away as like as reasonable? So like maybe it's bench and then squat, or like bench, rest, squat. Basically just like create space so the arm pain has hopefully kind of died down over time. The other thing is you can do your secondary squat if you squat twice a week, and or your back down sets with something that doesn't beat up your arm as much. So like you could high bar instead of low bar for your back down sets. Your secondary squat of the week, if you have one, could be like SSB. Another thing I've tried is like alternating low bar and like a Duffalo, so like the curved bar over here, because it basically helps you get into that like same sort of position, but the curve of the bar means it's like not as demanding. So it's still fairly similar in terms of like positioning and how you're squatting, but that lets you like touch a real straight bar every other week, so you're keeping some practice, but have something that beats up your shoulders a little less the other alternating week. So those are some strategies that you could use to like try and work around the arm pain if it is popping up. So the next thing we're going to cover is like bracing in the torso position. If you're really pinching the shoulders together and down super hard, it may naturally lead to like the rib cage kind of being flared up and like extended through the back. We don't want to like squat here. Like this would be super weak because your abs are really long and your low back is really short. And, like generally muscles are strongest in their like more mid-range sort of position. But it's not necessarily a bad thing that like pinching together and down kind of creates this, because then that gives us something like anchored down against when we brace. So we create tension on the front side and we have tension on the back side, then like everything's tight and we got a stiff torso. So you just need to make sure that you're deliberate after you set the shoulder kind of position. You intentionally pull the rib cage back down, get from here to there where like the rib cage is stacked like kind of in line over the pelvis. It should be like that, not like this or like that. And then from there we want to brace before you unrack. And strangely, a lot of people will just kind of like unrack all loosey-goosey and then expect to like get tight before they actually squat. I think pretty much everything should be set 100% before you unrack, because it's going to be much easier to set that sort of position and tension before the weight is on top of you, and then just like maintain it versus set it later. So I want you guys to try this drill real quick, because I think a lot of people kind of miss the boat when it comes to bracing, and this helps people get the feel for it. So I want everyone to just exhale like all your air out, like you're kind of trying to like fog up a mirror. So you're going to like do that with me, and then just keep going, keep going, keep going. You should notice like your abs get super tight, your ribs kind of drop down, your shoulders drop down. All right, you can stop and breathe. So we want those like kind of properties of exhalation. We want the like compressed position and like tension through the abs, but we still want our air because that gives us like more pressure. So we need both that like air component and the like active intent component of bracing. So it's not just like breathe in and don't breathe. Like if you just do that, you're still pretty loose. It needs to be like breathe in, and then you're like actively trying to exhale hard, but you keep a blocked airway so it doesn't like come out. Like that's the Valsalva maneuver that you might hear people talking about. It's that like active intent to exhale and like pressure. It's not just, or like you're still pretty loose. So that's what I think a lot of people miss. And like honestly, like that's what I would cue if you're trying to like brace in the squat. A lot of people think about like really pressing out into their belt and that kind of stuff. Like there's a little bit of that, but I think the biggest thing is just like have active intent to like create pressure, and that should kind of like be the big thing for bracing. On the topic of like belts, there's a lot of people that will like really cinch it down like way too tight. The problem there is if it's like a corset down here, then like where are you actually going to breathe? You're just going to end up like, so you're going to be like super expanded up here and like really arched, and then your squat's going to be like kind of weak as a result. So you want it actually like a little loose so you can breathe and expand out into the belt before you like try and brace. So I generally tell people like 2 fingers should be able to like kind of slide in there, or you should be able to like shift it around a little bit before you brace. So like that's before I brace. I can still fit fingers in there. I can kind of like shift it around a little bit. But then like once I actually breathe in, right, like now it's pretty snug. I can't really move it. I can't really fit a lot in there. But that's about like the amount of space that you're gonna add. And if it's much tighter, then you'll just find somewhere else to like kind of add that space. The other thing is a lot of people will complain about like the belt kind of pinching. So it'll be like one of 2 things. It'll be like they squat down, their belt hits their legs, and then it gets shoved up and like pinches up here, like against the rib cage. Or it's just like down at the hip, like underneath the belt, kind of like pinches a little bit. But either way, like a great option is just wear the belt a little higher. Like most people default to right around the belly button, which is fine. But it doesn't necessarily like have to be there. Like I personally wear mine just below the ribs. So like if I put it there, like here's my belly button, it's like still poking out a little bit. So you can wear the belt here and like still have it serve its purpose. If anything, that might even help, because like now you can breathe and like expand underneath the belt and not like force air up above. And it doesn't hit my thighs when I squat down, right? I've got room. It's not getting like shoved up or anything. So that's totally a valid option. And most people don't actually like think to try that. They go to a skinnier belt, or they wear one of the like tapered ones or something like that, rather than just shift it up. The other thing in terms of like bracing is one of the super common squat cues is like keep your chest up. The problem with that is as you squat down, you get more leaned over. If your chest stays up, then now you're just like super arched. You're in that like Kim Kardashian kind of position, and you kind of lost your brace. So, I mean, every cue has like a application. I'm sure there's some people where that sort of thought helps, but generally, a lot of people will kind of need the opposite, especially if they're not like as well leveraged. They have longer legs, a shorter torso. They have to be pretty leaned over. In that case, oftentimes you might even need to cue like intentionally like pull your ribs down, create more tension on the front side. So you kind of keep this as you bend and you end up there rather than kind of just being loose and letting it end up like that as you squat. So like ribs down and allow the torso to lean as you squat can be helpful for a lot of people. The next thing is the head. So I know that's kind of jumping back in terms of the order, but you can't really set your head position until after you brace. Because if you like pull your chin back in space and then you try and breathe, it just ends up like, and like you don't really get any air because that kind of blocks the airway in itself. So I would like brace is like the second to last thing. The last thing is like set your head position and then you can press to stand up with it to unrack. Or like before you start the squat, you probably re-brace, reset your head position, and then squat down. So not everyone is super deliberate with like packing their head, but a lot of people will benefit from it. I'd say it's probably more applicable for like thinner lifters that are a little more bent over compared to like really thick guys that are a little more upright. But it's basically just like pull your head back in space, like you're trying to make a double chin. A little bit of that sort of tension helps get the upper back a little tighter. And your head is pretty heavy. If it's just like hanging out in front, that can kind of like tip you forwards a little bit compared to like being pulled back in space. Kind of like we talked about earlier with the tucking thing, this can be like a dynamic thing. Like you only really need the chin packed really hard in the bottom as you go to stand up. You don't want the bar like shoving you forwards when you go to stand up like this. You don't want to go right and let that sort of tip happen. So theoretically, you could have the head like pretty loose and then tuck more as you sit down. But I think simplicity wise, it's easier to just set it from the start and hold it the entire time. And the other thing is like it really helps in terms of avoiding that like little shift forwards onto your toes or the bar like tipping you forwards. But I would pair it with like thinking about trying to keep your crown of your head to the ceiling. Like we want to like stay tall. So it's kind of like here and then push. So we don't end up accidentally like kind of here and then just like packed in like that. We don't want to be like here. We need it to be like there instead. So the people that like do get really tipped forward in the bottom, if their head also juts forward at the same time, that's what I would really cue. It's like keep the head back, but also like keep the head tall at the same time. So that's most of the like kind of positional stuff before we like actually get the bar out of the rack. The next big thing would be the walkout. Again, one of my like pet peeves with people is the ones that like shove the rack over. It's normally like juniors in the IPF, but like as they set up, they're like literally like tipping the whole rack where it's like, I can't actually do it on this one because it's got weights. But the rack's on a platform where there's like no weight to it and it's just a little stopper in the front. They can get the like whole rack to like actually tip. I don't understand that in the least bit because like if the weight is shifted out in front of where the rack will naturally sit, there's no way that you're like balanced underneath the bar to like pick it up unless like the rack is just going to like snap back and like hit you right afterwards. So it's like very clear that they're kind of off balance to even begin and they're just hoping to like kind of rush out of the rack in order to like get under it or something. So like never shove the rack over, just like get underneath it. It's fine to like have some pressure forwards into the rack to like set your back, but after that, like, you know, stand underneath it. Don't like tip the rack over. The other thing is the like double pick. They'll like unrack the bar, set it back down, unrack the bar again. It's like, why? Just kind of wastes energy. Some people say it's like to kind of feel out the weight before they start. If that's the case, I would just press into the floor. Like, don't pick the bar all the way up, but just like press and then keep a little tension as you brace, then kind of start. So like think about it like pulling slack out of the deadlift. We like gradually push a little more before we start like actually like trying to pick it up. You can do the same thing, or like on bench. Once you kind of have your shoulder set, you can press in the bar a little bit before you actually unrack it to like help lock yourself in place as you apply your leg drive so you're not sliding. Same thing with the squat. You can press into it before you really stand up with it to like help get a little tight. That would be a much better alternative to the double unrack. And the other problem with like the double unrack is in some federations that will kind of get you in trouble. as far as I know, USAPL doesn't have a rule about like how many times you can unrack and re-rack, but USPA only allows one. If you unrack the bar and you stick it back, you're allowed to do that, and like they'll give you an extra 30 seconds to like get back in position and try again. But you're only allowed to do it once. So like if you unrack, set it down, unrack, and that's like your normal setup. Well, if something's actually wrong, you already used your unrack. You can't like set it back and hope to get one more. At that point, you would just be done. So I think it's kind of silly. Like both of those things, if they're not habits that you have, you'd be like, well, of course, why would you do that? But they're still surprisingly common. I would also say, like get 100% tight before you unrack. Set the position of all the stuff that we already covered. So we want the back in position, we want a brace, we want the head in position, and then it's just press with the legs to stand up. A lot of people will kind of pick it up like this with their back, or they'll like shrug up into the bar as they stand up, or they're like really quick and aggressive with it. And now the plates are like bouncing and you have to deal with whip before you've even started. I would say just get tight, gradually press it out of the rack with just your legs. Like that's all there is to it. The walkout should be like very concise, repeatable steps. The same thing every time. You practice hundreds, if not thousands, of squat reps. There's no reason why you shouldn't be able to get it like the same every time. And even without looking, like a lot of people will just and then take their steps, and then they expect to like get back into good position afterwards once they've just been like completely rounded over and their head like totally down. I don't look at my feet like at all. I mean, if I've done this many reps and I don't remember where my feet go, then something's wrong. But if you do feel like you have to check, at least use your peripheral vision, right? Like you can keep your head here, you can go and like still kind of see, and then you don't have to go all the way to there and like completely round it over. But I would say like 3 steps is generally the magic number. When you see just 2 steps where it's just step, step, they tend to have to be pretty big, and there's a lot of rotation with the bar. Like anytime that you take one of those steps, the bar is going to have to twist. So when it's just one huge step, it's going to be big twist, big twist, compared to what I would recommend is like 3 steps, where it's basically like a half step, one full step that then sets this position, and then one full step that sets that position. And like the amount that the bar ever has to rotate taking those tiny steps is like very small compared to, you know, huge step, huge step. But then the other extreme would be like 4 steps. I would only recommend that if you're like super wide. If you go like half step, lateral, lateral, like that would be fine. But most people should be able to get away with half. That one sets it in its final position, full step, half step, that one sets it in its final position. And the other thing is, like notice I said final position. You shouldn't really need like a whole lot of like tiny little steps or like little pivot foot where you're like turning. It's like you should be able to set the rotation that you need as you take the step, which again saves energy. You can get to your squat a little faster, but it's also kind of making sure you're not placing the lift in the referee's hands, because like once you get the squat command, you can't move your feet. If you get the squat command, you pivot your foot or take a step, or you squat down and then you take a step while squatting or whatever, any movement of the foot once the squat command is given before the rack command is going to be a red light. So say you have an inexperienced young referee, you walk out, you get here, they go squat, and you go, then like you already just missed your lift before you even started. So if you just set that pivot as you walk out and get the rotation you want rather than having that as the last step, then you don't risk ever having that sort of thing happen. It's like it's just not really necessary. Like the level of precision that we need with the stance is like within a few degrees. Like I've seen someone squat 700 pounds where like one foot was here and one foot's kind of pointed like that, and you're like, what the hell is going on? But the reality is like, how much does it matter? You know, as long as it's like pretty close to what you want, it's probably good enough. It's probably not even worth like the little effort to like go from, you know, if you're right here and you wanted to be right there, like was it even worth making that like 2-degree adjustment? Probably not. So I would say like practice it enough that you can get to the point where you're like pretty darn close every time. And then pretty darn close is what we're after, not like 100% perfect. If you're working on making that transition because you were someone that like totally looks down, the simplest thing is just like add more practice. So like before you actually get under the bar, you can just do your normal thing, like look down, right? I want my step to be here and then there and then there. All right, do one with your head actually up, still not under the bar. There, there, there. Then like actually get under the bar and do your set. So like you're getting like 3 rounds progressively, like less and less focus on the feet, compared to just like one time each time that you're actually getting on the bar and doing a set. So that can be useful if you're like working to make that transition as something new for you. And the last like big mistake that I see with walkouts is a lot of people will treat them like steps. You know, when we're walking forwards, it's like heel, strike, and then roll to your toes. If we're walking backwards, a lot of people will go like toes and then really roll to their heels. You can basically just like slide. So like lift your foot up, still pretty flat, just enough that we have like clearance, you know, half an inch or whatever, and then just slide back. So there's not this like big like rock of like here to there, here to there. It's just slide, slide, slide. So like your whole foot kind of makes contact at once. And if you're taking like pretty small steps, that's fine and you're balanced. You don't really need like a big like rolling step with a heavy bar on your back. Do we have any questions on like the bracing, head position, walkouts, belts?
I have one question. Bracing. So
yeah.
We talked about the hard exhale.
Yeah.
And is there a inhale to I guess push the belt? When does that inhale happen? Does that happen on the unrack or does that happen on the squat?
Sure. So I would say we want that like intent to exhale, but we're not actually exhaling. So like the actual bracing sequence would be like you're tight, you're in position, breathe in and like fill up the stomach and the belt, and then you have that blocked airway and you're like actively like trying to exhale without actually doing it. There are some people that advocate for like actually exhaling to like set that position and then like setting your brace on top of that. So like those people think that you would need to go like fully exhale, set that position, and then you kind of keep that tension as you then inhale, and then again you try and set that like exhale tension without actually exhaling. So yeah, so that would be on the unrack. Then you would walk out, regardless of like which of the two you're doing. Now at this point you do have to exhale because you're holding your breath. So you exhale, and then you reset your brace. The only time that you can really like not rebrace, like realistically, would be in a mono lift. If you can just set your brace, pick, they swing the arms, then you can squat. That might be theoretically like ideal, but like a lot of people, even in a mono, will rebrace because you're not sure like kind of how quick they're gonna like swing the arms out of the way and that kind of stuff. So that's all clear in terms of like when stuff is happening. And okay, so moving our way on down, like now that we've kind of got all of this set and the walkout done, in terms of the hips, you don't really have to cue anything in terms of like sitting down. That part comes pretty naturally, but the like rotation kind of component is something that you occasionally have to cue for some people. If you see that like drastic knee cave as they go to push, they end up here and then they go like that. That's something that we probably want to change in the long run. I'm not worried about it from like an injury perspective. You know, a lot of people are like, oh, knee valgus is bad. The reality is that's probably out of context. Like we saw injuries in knee valgus during sports where people are like changing direction. They're like running as fast as they can. They're planting, they're turning, they're pushing. It's not like a very controlled, slow squat where we're going here and then there's a little bit of like knees in as you push. I think they're wildly different kind of contexts. In the squat, I'm like not super worried about it unless they're like completely out of control, like a complete Bambi teenager who's just like whoop. But generally, we want to kind of correct that because when the knees come in, the pelvis tends to get kicked back in space. Right? If you're here and the knees come in, the butt tends to shoot back like that. And then one of two things happens. You either keep your brace and suddenly you're really leaned over, or you lose your brace so that you keep the chest kind of in the same spot. And now you're just like super arched. And neither of those is good. So for like managing that knee cave, we just want some active intent at the hips. If someone doesn't have knee cave, I don't think that you necessarily like have to cue this for everyone. Like if it just naturally happens, where it's a balance of like internal and external rotation, then just let it be. If they're missing one of the two, so they're just like completely caving in, then we cue it. But what I would cue is like twist your quads away from each other, like just enough that you feel that tension at your hip, and then maintain that all the way down and all the way back up. That's way better than knees out, because knees out we can go to the other extreme and have issues there. If you like really shove your knees out, then they're just going to cave in even harder because they were like from one extreme to the other. Or you see people like roll to the outside of their feet because they're overdoing it. So twisting the quad away means that we're cueing something that's like right here at the hip, which is where we're trying to have that happen. If you were like, oh, well, grab the floor and like screw your feet out, that's like a whole extra 2 joints removed. We could end up with like torque at the knee or at the ankle, or there's a lot of ways that you could like accomplish that task without actually having what we're trying to have here. So cueing it like closer to the hip is probably helpful. So twist your quads, and then the important part is like just enough that you feel that tension at your hip. It's not like as hard as you can, it's just a little bit. And then most importantly, like make sure that you keep that as you go to press to stand back up, because that's when most people sort of lose it. And that's normally like a gradual process of like getting the hang of that. So they would probably need like a tempo squat as their back down sets or secondary or whatever, where they're really focused on keeping that as they press to stand back up. Maybe even tempo on the concentric as they stand up, not just the eccentric, because they're not losing it on the way down, they're losing it as they go to push. And like a leg press is another chance to practice that, because your feet and your legs are right there in front of you. You can see if the knees are actively caving in as you do it and like fix it in real time. So both of those should gradually help kind of build up the skill and then get better at it in your actual squat. So with the hips, we also kind of talk about like stance width. It's going to be individual. You can't just like watch someone else and like try and hope to copy theirs, because there's some factors that like we can't see. Like everyone has a ball and socket joint. The shape of the ball, the shape of the socket kind of varies person to person. You can have like a super deep socket where it's like really wrapped around. You can have a fairly shallow one. Like actual femur head can be like that or all kinds of stuff. So like the combination basically says like where your hips are willing to go. Like my hips are not able to like go super wide. If I go like super wide, I try and squat down, like that's as deep as my hips get. I couldn't squat any deeper than that, so I'd be blatantly high. Whereas like I can put my feet completely together and like go all the way down just fine. I've got like a guy on the UH team that's the polar opposite. He's like, oh man, conventional feels so weird. Like having my legs narrower than this, I like can't bend over much. And then he squats like all the way out here and just like hits depth super easily. So it's probably no amount of stretching that's like really gonna like wildly shift you from one end to the other. It's probably like hip structure. So I would say just go with what feels natural. There's going to be a certain width that feels strong and feels like you can comfortably hit depth, and other ones where it doesn't, unless you're just super gifted, I guess. But we want to just like kind of go with what works for you. With that being said, if you are someone that can go wider, just know that like wider squats tend to be more upright. The bar is always going to be like kind of over the middle of your foot. If it's not, something's going wrong. You're going to be kind of off balance. So the bar is over the middle of your foot and your stance is like way out wide. There's not a ton of like front to back distance of your legs. They're like pretty short, right? They're here instead of like that. So naturally you're going to be like a little more here compared to if that stance was in. The legs are longer, like from a side view, you're more bent over to be like directly over the middle of the foot. So that stance width changes like the relative position of everything up. But again, unfortunately, we can't just manipulate the stance width to get the position that we otherwise want in the same way that we could in like bench press, where like pretty much everyone can put their hands out wide or narrow and like still have their shoulders allow them access to that position. With the stance, it's a little different. Smaller lifters are generally going to prefer like more narrow, because it like scrunches you up a little more. You feel more stable and stronger when more of your body is kind of touching. Really big guys are naturally going to go wider for the opposite reason. They have to create space. If you have a belly that's like this and you have legs that are like that, then like you have to be here so that your belly doesn't just hit your legs as soon as you go whoop. So if you're like a 300-pound guy, you can tend to like be a little wider, and you might even be a little more upright because like your stomach and your legs like literally like make contact. So a lot of people will say their squat feels significantly stronger and more stable and more comfortable the more weight they gain. And that's just good to be aware of because like maybe if you put on enough size, you'll finally be a good squatter. Or if you are smaller, at least like realize that the narrower stuff might feel better. And then kind of as you put on more muscle and get stronger, you can like gradually potentially take that out. The last thing with the hips is kind of going back to that like spinal position and bracing. If you end up super dumped forwards like this, you're like really tilted forwards at the pelvis, that will stretch the adductors because they tie in on the pelvis and on the legs. So if you're here and it's already kind of stretched and then you try and squat down, you end up with like really lengthened adductors. So they probably feel uncomfortable. They get really sore and beat up from training. You might even see like repeat adductor tears in like big lifters that kind of have like a history of that. If there were like issues with the adductors, that would be the first thing I'd look at. It's like, are they initiating their squat super arched and like kind of tilting at the pelvis first rather than like staying braced? And that's probably something we want to get them out of in the long run so that we don't end up with those sort of adductor issues, and so that we can just load stuff more evenly. Like a general thing with any of the big three lifts, we want to distribute the force across all the available muscles that we have that are strong. We want to use our quads and our glutes and our adductors and our back and all that kind of stuff, not just one thing. And if we're here, we're really disadvantageous position for the glutes because now they're like here and they want to like do this, not that. Whereas the adductors are like look at me like that. now the adductors are really stretched. So like make sure that you keep that neutral position and like pelvic position as well. In terms of the knees, like I said at the start, there's not really anything to it. We don't have to like cue the knees. The only thing is like the knees should generally be kind of in line with the toes. If you're squatting with a fairly wide stance and toes pointed out, you probably shouldn't be like here. If you're like super narrow and like totally straight forwards, we probably don't want to be like all the way out there. So we're just looking for like pretty in line, and like that's our good neutral position, or like the hips doing what they should be doing so that the knees end up in the right spot. Down from there, we've got the feet. The big thing we want to talk about with feet is like foot pressure. Fortunately, this is like becoming more and more common to like talk about, but super important. It's one of the like biggest things that I look for in like squatting. If someone's pressure is like totally on their heels, the rest of their body is like shifted back in space more. If you just like shift from one to the other, you can see like everything else kind of moves. If you're like totally on your toes, you tend to be a little shifted forwards. And when you're on your toes, you can still kind of like push with your quads, but you don't really have a great access to like all the posterior muscles. When you're on your heels, like you can still kind of use that stuff, but you can't really push with the quads nearly as well. So like good balanced foot pressure means we can use all our musculature to its strongest, and you're just more stable. So your body's going to be willing to like push more. And it means that you're like in good positions from there up. So we want to see like the whole foot flat in contact with the floor the entire time. If you see like a big shift towards one extreme or the other, something's going on. And then I would tend to cue just like flat feet, press your whole foot into the floor, keep like balanced foot pressure. I don't tend to encourage the like really rotation based ones, like rooting or grab the floor and twist away, that kind of stuff. I'm not a huge fan just because I think it overemphasizes the like torque or rotation. Like if you look at bench press as a quick analogy, if you like think bend the bar, like turn it into a horseshoe, normally people end up like really here. Suddenly they're like way over tucked. Their elbows are like not even underneath their wrists anymore. They're trying to like press like this. I think we can kind of end up with the same thing in the squat if we like really cue like twisting like way down there. Plus, you can just end up with like uncomfortable torque at the knee, or the whole foot kind of rolling out. And we'll get to it in just a second with like ankle mobility. But I'd say a lot of people's like ankle mobility restrictions are just other issues. One of them might be that like foot sort of thing when the foot is like really arched up like this, or like actively like trying to like grip the floor and like pull in and all that. The more arched the foot is, the less space you have for the knee to like really travel forwards. When you kind of flatten out and let it like go from here more to there, the bone here kind of like shifts and lets the actual shin like travel forwards a little more. So the first thing I would try if someone's like, oh, I don't have ankle mobility, I can't squat deep, is just like try and actively press your feet flat into the floor and see if that allows you a little more room and a little more forward knee travel. If that's something you want to like play around with, you can just try it yourself. You can just have like actively like really curl up and arch your foot, try and drive your knee forwards, and you like flatten out and like press the inner edge down, and you should be able to let it like get a little further. So that would be the first thing I'd try. Just flatten your feet. The other big issue for like ankle mobility is just like not managing your center of mass. If you're super shifted forwards onto your toes and you're like, well, I'm running out of room, I can't get any deeper, it's because your body like doesn't want to let you like keep going when you're already like totally off balance and in a weird position. So try and figure out how to have more balanced foot pressure. You know, if you're ending up shifted forwards, maybe you need to not just bend your knees and be here. Maybe you need to let your butt kind of like reach back in space and hinge a little bit as you squat instead. And if they like clean up that kind of stuff, the ankle mobility like suddenly magically is way better. But if it's not one of those two issues, then heeled shoes are a great option. You know, we can just tilt your starting position. If this is like 0 degrees of dorsiflexion and my bottom position is like, oh, well, I'm after 50. If we just put on shoes, now we're starting at like -10, -15. So the bottom position now, we only need 40. So that change might be enough to get you within the range that you like actually have access to. So heeled shoes are an option, but generally I would make sure those other things are not the problem before just being like, oh, they need heels. I had just a couple other technique things to cover. This one is talking more like generally. We've kind of like worked ourselves way like section by section. So this is like the shape. There's like 3 real things that will change like how your squat looks, at least better within your control. The fourth one that like you can't change would be like limb length. If you have really long legs and a short torso versus long torso and short legs, kind of different. Like the ideal squatter would generally be like pretty short legs and a long torso, so that they're like, you know, this is really big, and they can basically just stay like super upright and have their legs like hit depth and then just stand right back up. Whereas like really long legs and a short torso, you end up really bent over and having to travel a much further distance. Also, squat kind of rewards being fat generally. So like the ideal squatter would be really thick, pretty short legs, pretty long torso. The 3 things we can change though is that bar placement. Generally low bar is more mechanically advantageous, but it also means like slightly more bent over, slightly less forward knee travel, and more like back in space. That wider stance, like we talked about, generally means slightly more upright. Compared to if they were like super narrow, they'd be a little more bent over. You know, like super narrow females often end up in like that sort of position for their low bar, and that tends to be pretty strong because like then they can use their like low back and glutes and hamstrings and all that kind of stuff, and a little bit less just like leg strength. And for the like smaller females, that tends to like kind of play to their strengths a little better. The third factor would just be the heeled shoes. With the heeled shoes, you tend to have a little more forward knee travel and therefore like a little more upright. So there's like 3 factors that you can kind of play with within reason. Like some of them you're kind of stuck, you know, stance width, there's only a little range that you have. Heeled shoes versus not, one or the other is probably better for you. And then bar placement, like most people are going to be better off low bar. There's just like the odd outlier that likes high bar. And then the other thing in terms of like shape of your squat is just think about like how similar to your deadlift is it. If you're like making programming decisions of like how much volume can I train with these two different movements, this tends to be really applicable for like someone with pretty good squat leverages. So they squat really wide. They're relatively upright. They end up kind of like here in their squat. But then they also sumo deadlift, where they're pretty much like here in their sumo deadlift. They like basically turn both movements into the same thing, just with the bar on their back versus in their hands. Or I guess the other extreme would be like the super narrow stance, super bent over, like smaller female kind of lifter, that then also conventional deadlifts. But the more similar the two look, the more you're basically like doing double volume in one movement. So you may look to have secondary exercises that like switch it up a little bit, at least in the off season, so you can handle more total volume, rather than all of this stuff that like looks the same. Maybe you do your sumo deadlift, but then you squat high bar, so it's a little more quads, or maybe you pull conventional in the off season and you keep squatting with your regular stance, stuff like that. So you get like slightly different stress over different tissues. If you have a squat and deadlift that look totally different, then you don't really have to worry about that. And obviously, as you get towards the meet, you gradually get more specific. It's just you may not be able to handle as much volume and intensity as someone that had like the two that look completely different. And then the last thing I want to cover is like pre-hinging. It's a like strategy for squatting. Generally, you bend the knees and the hips at the same time, and you kind of squat down so your bottom position is there. Pre-hinging is basically just trying to set that hip position before you really start. So from there, all that you really need in order to get to your squat position is just bend the knees and then stand back up. I used to like personally use it, and I like have taught some clients to do it, but I've gradually moved more away from it. Because the benefit or like reason why people might use it is it simplifies the squat. If you set the torso angle, then all you have to do is just sit straight down and stand right back up, and that's it. But the problems in reality are, do you actually maintain the position where after as you do it? And a lot of people really struggle with that. Like if they would arch into extension as they squat, they're probably just gonna arch into extension as they go to set that pre-hinge. Or you see people like kind of shift back on their heels as they pre-hinge, or keep like totally locked knees as they pre-hinge, and they end up in this like weird awkward position. So what we're really after for like a good pre-hinge would be like you have soft knees, so they just kind of stay in place. The shins are vertical. You keep like a good brace and neutral spine, so you end up here, not there, and you keep like balanced foot pressure. So if you did all three of those things and you ended up here, and then from there you squatted down, it would be totally fine. But how many people like actually manage that? It's pretty slim. And if they can't actually manage that, they're probably already actually managing like a good squat, like fluidly doing both at once. So like at this point, I feel like it's an option, but I wouldn't necessarily like move people in that direction generally. If you do use the pre-hinge, one thing to keep in mind is it might need to be after the squat command, depending on like just how drastic it is. You know, if you are here and then you set a really big lean, you're not going to get the squat command because you're not upright. Or you have that soft knees as you set it. Well, now your knees are bent. You're not going to get the start command. So like wait until after they say squat to pre-hinge, unless it's just like super, super subtle, where it's just like, whoop, and that's it. And like how drastic the pre-hinge is based on like how much lean you need in your squat. So what's your stance width, how long are your limb lengths, that kind of stuff. The more leaned over your bottom position in the squat, the more you're going to have to set like a drastic pre-hinge before you start. Whereas people that like hardly need to lean over at all, they can have a very like tiny pre-hinge and then just squat down from there. So that's all I had in terms of the technique stuff. I figured if anyone has questions over that stuff, we can cover it now, and then we would move on to like a brief discussion of programming, and I'll hand it over to you.
When you say to turn your quads out, that makes me think. Sorry, my knees.
I
have a little bit of that issue where my knees came.
Sure.
Going up, but I don't know what you mean by just your quads.
Sure.
How do you think about that?
So it's not that we're like actually trying to move your quads. We're just trying to create rotation at the hip, because that's what the knee cave is. It's like a loss of rotation at the hip where we like totally turn in this way. So we're trying to have some turn out that way to like balance it and have it stay kind of in line. It's just like cueing it at the quads, like twisting there, as opposed to like further away, keeps it like close to the hip. So they're just like a convenient landmark of like, this is something you can think about. But like the real outcome is the knees will be twisted slightly away, and then hopefully keeping that tension is what keeps them from shooting in. All right, so I had super brief stuff on knee wraps and then the programming. With knee wraps, I would say like the big thing to keep in mind is it doesn't visually change technique. Like what we're looking for in a good squat is the exact same sleeves or wraps, but the way that you like feel it or the intent might change slightly. So like when I have knee wraps on, I intentionally have to like think about trying to shove my knees forward, and like I almost do kind of cue chest up. It's more so like I'm trying to not let it like kick me back, because the thing people that have never like used wraps don't realize is like they're basically like actively trying to straighten your leg. If you're not really intentional about like shoving into the wraps, then they're just gonna want to like kick you back and like straighten your leg and like dump you backwards. So you have to like very deliberately push into the wraps and end up here, not letting them like bind up where like as they start to get tight, suddenly you just shift back more and more and more rather than like actually bending the knees more and more. So the feeling might be different even if they like look the same. And try to keep the knees like going forwards, not letting it like bind up and stop you. In terms of wrapping, a lot of people will either do it just like sitting on one thing with their leg like down on the floor, or like up on something. I liked up on something because I felt like it was just easier to get to my leg. You want to actively flex your quad so that you're getting the knee like tight and in the position that we're after. If it's just kind of chilling and loose, then the kneecap can like shift around as we're like pulling on it with the wrap. So we want to like actively straighten the leg, and you want to pull the toe pull the toe up towards you, because that will get the calf like down and out of the way and kind of taut. So we're after like this sort of position as you do the wrap. You also will hear people talk about like directionality. They're like, oh, you want to wrap outwards, not inwards, because you want to like pull your knees out, not in, so they don't cave. I think that's just superstition, because like wrapping your knees is not going to mean that your knees cave in. Like that's happening from the hip, not from the knee. If you plan to do knee wraps for a bunch of people, it might be good to be in the habit of doing them directionally, so you don't accidentally like do them the same way on someone and they're like, oh my god, I'm about to go squat, I'm superstitious, you're gonna blow up my knees or something. But if you're doing it on yourself, just know that it doesn't matter, know that it doesn't like impact the hips, and just do them the same way, because then it's like extra repeatable. If you always wrap to the right, then you basically get double the practice of doing your wrap rather than having a separate skill for like one versus the other. Another thing is a lot of people will tie it with a tag. Like they'll leave a loop at the start, they'll have a loop at the end, and then they like tie them together or like pull one through. That's fine if it works for you. Like a lot of people use it, but I find it like it's super uncomfortable, because then you end up with one section that's like really tight because you're like yanking it through or like tying it down. So I didn't like that style. I just started against my leg. There was no tag. And then whenever I finished, I pulled it through like the wrap layer that I'd just done. And like pliers were super helpful for that, because you can just tuck those underneath, grab it, and pull it through, rather than like needing to like dig your hand through, which is a much bigger kind of opening. I started with insert grippers. I moved to like a regular one, because the grippers have like rubber on the inside. So ideally it's not like sliding around. That's the selling point, at least. I think in reality, it just meant it tugs on your leg hair and like binds up extra hard, and it was super uncomfortable. So I would just go for regular knee wraps if I was like getting started. Like I've used the Elite FTS crates. I like those a lot. But I'll show you like one wrap real quick. just for whoever's curious. But I'm not offering to let people use my wraps today because I don't want to be liable if someone tries wraps for the first time and it doesn't go well. So the first thing is you're probably going to want to roll them ahead of time because otherwise you'd have to create like all the tension as you actually put it on. So the process for that, you can get a wrap roller, but they're like $300. Otherwise, you just kind of crank it like this. You can use your foot to like pull that tension, and then you're just rolling it. I'm going to do this like fairly loose and quick just so that we can move on to the example. But in reality, you'd be trying to do this like pretty damn tight. Your forearms definitely get pumped and uncomfortable by the end of it, especially if you're doing like multiple. So it's super helpful if you have friends that are willing to help. Thank you for all the times you helped with mine. And on meet day, I would always have an extra pair of wraps because what if it slips out of your hands while you're putting it on? Then like you're not gonna just re-roll it in the time that you're about to like go squat. So you need like a backup pair that it's already pre-rolled that you can just grab. And then honestly, I'd say the ideal thing is if you can afford it, get 3 pairs. So you have, I'm using this for my last warm-up in the warm-up room because you probably want at least 1 warm-up in wraps before you go on the platform, maybe 2. But honestly, like wrapping in the warm-up room is a pain in the ass because like you have to load your weight, and then someone's trying to like change it while you're over there wrapping, or it sucks. So yeah, have the warm-up pair that you then re-wrap or re-roll, and then you use that on your opener. And you've got 2 pairs that you already rolled ahead of time. That's like second attempt, third attempt. And then once you're done with the first attempt, you re-roll it in case so that you have your backup pair for the third. I guess if you're really bougie, you could get like 4 or 5 or something. But I would say just like get 3, and then if you're wanting to have fresh, new, super stiff wraps for the next meet, then you gradually have that like training pair from the previous one kind of become like, oh, I'll use that for my last warm-ups, and then I'll use the newer ones for my actual spots. So normally I would just grab 2 chairs. I think this will work well enough. So straight leg, pull the toes up. You can just go the same direction on both sides if you want. But how I ended up liking doing the wraps, I started like just below the knee, because the thing to keep in mind is like we want all the material pretty much here where it actually does something. If it stretches out lower or higher than the knee, it's not actually helping. But I also found if I went super, super compressed, like just right here, it bound up like so much that it almost got in the way of my squat. So there's definitely a little bit of a balance there. But I would start here and then go across. And then generally you're after about like half kind of overlap. So the next one goes up just a little bit. Up just a little bit. And then I did one more. So like still kind of covering the knee, but starting to get up on the quad. So I did 4, like 1, 1, 1, 1. And then from there, I did an X across, an X across the other way. And then I went straight across the center, either like 1 or 2 more times, depending on like how tight it was. Like if I really rolled them tight ahead of time and like pulled them really tight as I went, then I could generally get a good amount of revolutions. So that's what I found worked for me. What I was talking about earlier with the tag thing, some people will basically like start up here. They keep like an extra bit like that. They wrap all the way around. The very last thing they do is they have one down here, and then they try and like loop those together and like pull it tight. But that means that like this one little bit ends up like super cinched. And generally when wraps are always uncomfortable, but when wraps are like really, really suck, it's generally when there's like inconsistent pressure. Like one bit is like super tight compared to the rest of it. Because then rather than being like a big hug, it's like one bit is just like digging in. So yeah, those would be my big tips for knee wraps after having done a couple meets with them. And I guess like timing wise, on meet day, you generally, well, time how long it takes you to wrap in the gym, and then like plan for that on meet day. But generally, you want at least a whole lifter in front of you. So if I know there's someone on the platform, a lifter in front of me, and then me, that's about the time that I'm like actually starting to like put my wraps on, which means, you know, a whole lifter before that, I'm like getting all my stuff together. I'm sitting where I need to be, that kind of stuff. Because that should give you, you know, 2 minutes or so. And then the other things to look for, if the weight or the rack height is the same for 2 lifters in a row, then they're going to be extra quick turning over the platform. You might need to start even a little bit earlier, right? Because they're just going to say same weight. They're just going to change the rack height, and then it's going to be next to the lifter rather than like an extra 15 seconds or something. So like keep an eye on that. And then if there is something unexpected, like at a meet in Florida, at a lifter wrap, and then right before he went on the platform, they were like, "Oh, this bolt just fell off the rack. That doesn't look very good." And then they're like trying to figure out where it was from and like put it back on and all kinds of shit. And it was like, what the fuck? So it's like 3 or 4 minutes before he actually went out there and squatted. It's not ideal because you're like, oh, I can't really feel my feet. But at the same time, like I've seen people do it and they're fine. So if you're really worried about it, skip your attempt, right? You can just hit your opener in the second round instead, and then like split the difference between your plan second and your plan third and like take that as your third. It's not the end of the world if you're like super worried about it. But the biggest thing is probably just anxiety. Like chill the fuck out. You're going to be fine. And if you want to like be able to say that to yourself on meet day, something really useful is like to have actually been there before. So maybe when you're still pretty far out from the meet and it's not like a crazy kind of day, you know, like a moderate sort of squat, maybe intentionally put your wraps on, sit around for 2-3 minutes, whatever, and then go do your set rather than always putting your wraps on, standing right up, doing your set. Because then when that happens on meet day, you're like, I'm fine. I've done this before. I know what it's like. It's not that big a deal. And then for programming like knee wraps, I would start with the knee wraps like 12 to 14 weeks out if you haven't used them a lot before, because you need time to like get used to them and build up the skill. So that's, you know, 3 blocks ish. When you're deloading, I would do that in sleeves. So I generally do like, you know, 2-3 hard weeks of wrap squats and then deload week in sleeves. That's like RPE 5. And I've done like 2 different ways of wrapping and like progressing towards the meet. The first one was just reps. You know, it was like a block of triples, a block of doubles, a block of singles, and like each block it was like RP7, RP8, RP9. So it just kind of gradually ramped up. I liked the second one a lot better and would probably be more natural for someone that doesn't have a ton of wrap experience, which is basically like cycle the tempo. So like everything's a single, but the tempo is the variation that like kind of manipulates how heavy it is. So your first time in wraps would be like a 4 count eccentric and a 2 count pause. Some people get weird about like using wraps on tempo. They're like, oh, well, you're going to lose the like spring. There's not really spring. It's just stored energy, right? Like, I mean, even if we're using the example of a spring, if you compress a spring, just because you hold it there for 2 seconds doesn't mean it doesn't spring back. It's like as soon as you let go, it just does its thing. So you can do tempo and wraps just fine. And the benefit is like you feel out the position, you feel the wrap like trying to like get stiff and shove you back, and you like still load into it anyways. So if anything, it's easier to figure out your positioning doing a tempo rep than a regular, and especially like 3 regular reps trying to like have all 3 of them be good. So I would go like 4-2 tempo. The next week maybe a 3 count on the way down, 1 count pause. The next week maybe a 2 count pause, and then deload. Like that's the first block. The next block you would just strip back the tempo a little bit. So you start with like 3-1, then 2 count pause, then a comp single, and deload. And then the last block could just be regular singles. So like RP7, RP8, RP9, whatever. So I was a huge fan of that kind of structure. And like that's what I would probably recommend if someone's like brand new to wraps and like trying to figure it out. In terms of general programming, not about wraps anymore, I would generally recommend squatting twice a week for most people. But it doesn't necessarily have to be the comp squat both times. Tempo and pause are like my go-to just general recommendation for most people because they clean up like so many issues. If you just slow it down, spend more time in the position, normally you kind of like learn to self-correct a lot of stuff. And the other benefit is they really emphasize not getting kicked forward by the bar. When you're in a dead stop in the bottom, and then you go from here to there, there's a natural tendency for the bar to want to like stay in place and your body to just kind of like whoop. So you have to work extra hard to like make sure that you keep that position as you go to stand up. So those would be my general like go-to variations. I'd also say just get good at a lot of different squats. If you can front squat well, you can SSB well, you can high bar well, what's the likelihood that you still suck at low bar? Pretty low. But like obviously that kind of stuff fits more in the like off season and secondary and all that kind of stuff. But just generally get good at squatting. And then I would say, in my opinion, stance is not a variation. You know, on bench, I give people wide grip, I give people close grip, but I don't really say like narrow stance squat or like wide stance squat. Because again, a lot of people don't have access to like wildly different hip positions, or like different enough that it would be a different stimulus. You know, I could take my stance from like here to there and be fine, but like, is that really a different squat? You know, I can't go from here to there and still expect to squat. And the very few people that do have access to like multiple positions, they probably are going to like really struggle with controlling the position if it's not how they normally do it. So I don't really like change stance as a variation for squatting. And then I don't think weak points are like real in squat. You know, it's not like, oh man, I really stalled out like here in my squat because I'm just really weak at this one position. Generally, it's just you lost position and then you missed the squat at whatever point that thing got really emphasized. So yeah, you might have like gotten really tipped forwards and then missed your squat because of that. You lost your upper back, your hips caved, something like that. But it's not like I need to get stronger at this one part of the range of motion. It's generally like I need to hold position in the way that like broke down and caused me to miss the lift. So I had just a couple like specific breakdowns. The first one being depth. I would say very rarely do people struggle with depth on its own. It's normally a reflection of like struggling with balanced foot pressure and like center of mass. They end up shifted forwards on their toes, or they kind of lose that hip position as they squat down, and then as a result they kind of miss depth. The one exception would be like people that just like kind of ego lift, right? They're week by week they're like, oh yeah, that was fucking sick squat, man. I'd never hit that weight before, and it was like 4 inches high. And then rather than like fix that the next week, they're like, well, maybe I could go up 20 more pounds. And then suddenly for 2 months they've only been training high squats and they expect to like actually be able to get to depth. That would be pretty much the only time that like there's probably not some other thing going on with it. It's just like if their own personality kind of got in the way. But things that like really help, tempo. If you slow it down, it helps feel out like getting to the right position. Pause. You spend more time in the bottom position and get better at like controlling it. And then a box squat, but I would do it in a very specific manner, not like traditional West Side. We're not like going super wide and sitting back and like rocking back on the box. It's just like the box is a reference point that tells you when you're at depth, and like you just barely touch it, you pause, you stand back up. So like at least 50 to 70% of the weight should stay in your legs, not on the box. We're staying like in our normal squat groove. We're not sitting back. It's just squatting. You touch the box, you stay pretty tight, you pause, and then you press to stand back up. So it's basically a pause squat with like an external kind of constraint of like, this is where depth is. And for someone that has like the opposite issue of depth, generally it's like they don't feel a lot of tension. They're pretty loose, so they just like keep on going. Again, tempo, force them to control it a little more, pause, and shocking, a box squat. It helps them learn like where depth is. So honestly, a lot of the solutions are kind of the same, whether it's too loose and too deep versus like not actually getting to depth. In terms of the knee cave, because they're not controlling the hips, we kind of talked about it some earlier, but like the tempo, maybe even as you press to stand back up, not just on the way down. Being super deliberate with leg press as your accessories, like being very aware of keeping that like twist the quads away and keep that as you go to push. because that will transfer back over into like doing your squats. And then the other variation would be like a 1.5 squat. So you squat all the way down, you press to stand halfway back up, which is generally a lot less than people think. When you tell them halfway, they go all the way to here, and you're like, no, that's like 3/4 at least. So like, just think press a few inches. So like all the way down, halfway back up, pause a split second, back down, all the way up. That's 1 rep. Because essentially, like, if they're not controlling their hip position, they're just going to be like kind of all over the place. To do that well, you basically have to like hold the hip position, press, stand back up. Or like the other thing that works really well for is people that get really pitched forward or like lose the upper back. It's learning to like hold position and just press with the legs so that you have like a smooth fluid squat where you can just do this. If you're losing the knees or the upper back or whatever, it's going to be like all over the place and like really funky, and they're going to feel it right away. That one obviously is more of a like secondary sort of lift thing. That wouldn't be like the main heavy squat of the week. Whereas you could have tempo or pause or even box squat be like the main thing of the week, depending on, you know, the phase and what your goal was. Upper back rounding. I'd say the big thing, pause. When you press out of the dead stop, it really emphasizes not losing position. The 1.5 squat, the box squat, because it's basically just a pause squat with the box. And then SSB would be the other one. Sweet. Yeah, because it sits a little higher and a little forwards because the bar has that like curve where the weight is like basically out in front. So it's like really trying to tip you over. If someone struggles with like foot pressure, they end up like shifting forwards on their toes or whatever. I would say front squat is a great option because if you end up shifting forwards on your toes, the bar probably rolls forward and then you're starting to like lose it forwards, and it's going to suck because either you have to like really fight to hold on to it or it just falls off you and like you learn like, oh, not going to do that again. So front squat, tempo, pause, 1.5, they all kind of work for the foot pressure stuff as well. Any questions on the programming stuff or just in general?
So right now, like my second squat day is mainly focused on SSB. Should I swap it to like the pause or tempos and then do SSB for my second lift that day?
So you only squat once a week or twice a week?
Twice. Like
Okay.
my first day is like my comms lift, and then
Okay.
do like surgeries and stuff.
Okay.
And then my second squat day, I usually start SSB and whatever other leg extra.
Gotcha. I would say maybe like zoom out a little bit, like a long-term sort of plan. You don't have to do everything right now. It can be like, this is the process. So it could be a paused SSB as like the first thing in the off season. And maybe you keep the comp squat as the other day. This is just like general kind of talking. Maybe at some point you pull out the pause, and then at some point you switch from the SSB to a regular straight bar, like as you gradually get towards a meet. So you can kind of like layer these components, and then the goal is to like gradually go from non-specific that really emphasizes your weakness and like kind of limits the load to like more towards the comp lift as you get to when the comp lift actually matters. And if you don't have a meet for a year or whatever, then you just set up basically like the same sort of cycle. So it's like from non-specific light to like more specific heavy, and just kind of wave through it like that. But I'd say like there's a million ways you could set it up, but as long as there's at least a squat in the week that really emphasizes what you need, and enough squat stuff that's like specific enough that you don't lose the skill of like actually squatting, then you're probably gonna be fine.